They say a picture tells 1,000 words, and so do maps. So in this video, I'm going to present you 5 different maps from 5 different perspectives based on what has been reported on the Battle of Bakhmut as it is today. So let's dive into it right now. Now I'm going to start with this map from a website called Military Land. It does appear that the maps on this web page have not been updated in several months and may not be updated anymore. So it's a little unfair to show you this one first, but I wanted to kind of present this one and get it out of the way. It was a pretty good map overall. I think they did a very good job at documenting the Russian attacks and the Ukrainian counteroffensives. But again, this map is now outdated and it doesn't show the information as it is today. According to this map, it looks like it was December 14th, 2022, so a little over 2 months ago. This was the front line around the area of Bakhmut. And this is important because at least it sets the stage for the other maps that I'm going to show you and really the development of the battle in and around the city of Bakhmut. Here, back in December, the big news was the Russian push this way into this industrial area and this way into the outskirts of this little residential area. Now, this industrial area saw a lot of heavy fighting, including one called the Siniat factory area. And I made a previous video on it. I'm going to go ahead and link it here in case you want to go watch something for context into what we're talking about here. So again, this map is outdated and it presents the least amount of information for today's situation on the ground. So let's go to a next map. There's a couple of very good YouTube channels out there from 2 different Ukrainians. And one of those, they use this map quite a bit. This comes from a website called Deep State. I believe it is independent, but I can't verify that. However, it does give a lot of very good up-to-date information once you look at the map and interpret the information that's on there. The important thing here is the map showing the advances that have happened into the north and south areas of the city of Bakhmut, particularly this advance here towards the main road. This was a big push to get to this main road, which I have shown in another video, and I'll put a link to that here as well, that if you look at the 3D animation of this area, it really shows why there was a big push here. This is a hillside. This road actually is across the crest or the top of the hill, and so it was a very strategic location for future attacks and advances by the Russian forces. In addition, when you look at this map, we can see areas of Krasnohora and Podhorodne here, where for many days and even weeks, these areas were still under Ukrainian control. In fact, what had happened was as the Russians pushed this way, it created this salient around this area. And this area was still Ukrainian controlled while the Russians were trying to advance this way. As we can now see from this most current map, the Russians have advanced and actually gone beyond the roadway and have taken over the towns of Berkivka and Yahidne right here to the north and are starting to push this way towards the north side of Bakhmut. I'm going to get into that in a minute, but again, this is a really good map to show where the advances are taking place and the direction that the Russians have gone. And again, when I speak of the Russians, I'm discussing the overall Russian forces that include the Wagner Group PMC. Okay, so now we're seeing the other advances here. In the prior map that I showed you, this area here was that Siniat factory area and some of the residential areas here to the south. And we can see that this map is showing that there have been some pushes, at least reported, that go all the way into the outskirts of the eastern side of the city of Bakhmut and along this river. There's also pushes from the south. And so it does look like the perimeter area of the city of Bakhmut's defenses are starting to shrink and have been shrinking for the last few weeks. Now let me talk real quickly about the southern end of the city of Bakhmut's battle, and that is down here in this area. I also reported, and I'll put a link again here for you if you'd like to go back and look at that video, but there is a bridge that was reported blown right about here, which is approximately southeast of the city of Chasivar. And there were reported advances by the Russian forces. It does appear that the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back away from the roadway. The city of Ivanivske here in the western side of Bakhmut is still under potential threat to be attacked or overrun, and there's also a push this way here to reach this road. The Russians have been trying to control the southern road area here in order to basically cut off the two major roadways that supply the city of Bakhmut. They've already taken this area here, which is a hillside as well, and they're trying to take the southern area to prevent any further reinforcements to the city of Bakhmut. The thinking there from a tactical perspective is that if you can cut off the supplies to the soldiers in Bakhmut, you would force them to either be destroyed there if they stay or to retreat, and they would have to reach somewhere along these fields or this other smaller road on this side. So there still is a very big danger of encirclement. This map does show some things that some of the other maps don't show. So again, it's a great way to look at these and compare them. The next map to review is basically very similar to the previous one. It does show the advances of the Russian forces on the north side, capturing the entire roadway area here, the hillside areas. Obviously, the city of Krasnohora and the city of Pirohodnet have been captured, and there is a little bit of a push here into this little area of Jahidnit, which is a little bit of a northern village outskirts of Bakhmut. The eastern side of the map here does not show very many advances. It does show some attacks and bombardments here, but it does not quite show, as the previous map did, the advances up to the river line and the capture of the residential and industrial areas here. So again, it's a little bit of a different map, different perspective. On the southern flank, it does mirror a little bit of the previous maps. It shows that the Russian advances are now short of the roadway here south of Chasivar, and it does show some advances here towards the roadway, but it still shows the road clear of any Russian control. So we don't know exactly what's going on. Obviously, there's the fog of war and the ever-changing battles that are going on. But this map does at least present the idea that the southern flank of the Bakhmut defenders is a little bit safer. It's under Ukrainian control at the moment based on this map, and does allow additional reinforcements and supplies to reach the city. So again, different perspective, and we'll see how that pans out. Our next map comes from the Institute for the Study of War, which I find has had very good information, very well vetted out, and does appear to be very objective in the way they present their information. Let's take a look at their map right now. Here we can see the Institute's map. Again, just like the prior maps, it is showing the Russian advances on the north side, the roadway area and hillsides here to the north being under the control of the Russian forces. It does show the same advances here towards the north side of the city of Bakhmut. It does show that the Russians have pushed west along this area of the Bakhmut area. However, it does not show the advance coming all the way to this river line that was here. So it's a little bit different map again as well. On the southern flank, it does show that the Russians have either been stopped or pushed back to this line, away from the roadway and away from the blown bridge, approximately in this location. Along this area, it does show that the Russians may have reached the roadway along this side, and that can also potentially mean that the road for supply is cut off. Again, it does leave this roadway open, as well as fields across this way for any sort of supplies or even possible tactical redeployment by the soldiers in Bakhmut. This map does show something interesting, and does show a little bit of, it's hard to see, but it does show a little bit of the elevation marks along here, some ridges and so forth. But I'm going to cover that in the next map, so let's jump to it. In this last map, I wanted to show you the topography of the area. Now, I started using this map several weeks ago, and some of the other channels were not using this map, and it was really hard to interpret why some of these advances were taking place in certain areas and maybe not in other areas. I made a video on that as well, and I'll put a link here as well for you if you want to see that. But I'm glad to see that other channels reporting the battles in the Ukraine, and specifically the Bakhmut area, are starting to include this map when speaking about the battle tactics and the advances. It does show a different perspective, and that perspective is basically the height elevation areas in and around the city of Bakhmut. I'm going to zoom in a minute, but for here I wanted to just kind of show you the overall area. As the Russians have been pushing west from all of these areas, they have run into hills and other defensive areas which have presented bottlenecks for their advance. The city of Bakhmut itself sort of sits in this little valley area. There's a river that runs through it, and so as the Russians were pushing west, it was important for them to capture some of that high ground. In doing so, some of the high ground that was reported taken and where battles were being fought several weeks ago and continuing to be fought today was this northern wooded area here. As you can see, it's a little bit in an elevation point, and then the factory areas were here and some of that residential area here. So as the Russian forces were advancing this way, they were also trying to capture this hillside area here in order to maintain elevation advantages, be able to put in their artillery and mortars in a better position to basically dominate and shoot all over the city of Bakhmut. So that's why the advances took place in these areas. Following up on that whole idea of why there's been a big push for certain areas, we can now look a little bit to the north side. Now, there was a big push at this point here to take this hill and the roadway that runs along this crest. The Russians have actually managed to take all of this area here, so they've taken some of the low areas as well as some of this high ground, and now can dominate the entire northern sector of the Bakhmut region. In addition to this, with the Russians controlling some of this high ground, they have been able to then control this other minor roadway area that could bring in supplies for the Ukrainian forces. Lastly, Urkivka is located here, and the Russians have reportedly taken that area. So now roughly the Russians kind of control this entire area, some of this valley, the little town. They've taken some of this northern village area, and they also control all of this area here as well, and also reportedly be controlling all the way up to the river here. So the Russians have really taken a big chunk of the area in and around the city of Bakhmut. And if they continue to do this, it's very easy to see that they can dominate the city. Now, I wanted to also point out that, and I made a video on that as well, that losing the city of Bakhmut is not in itself losing the war. In fact, I believe that the Ukrainians have fought very bravely, and the Ukrainians have used a very good strategy here and have really cost the Russian forces, including the Wagner group as well, very high casualty rates. I'm sure there's high casualty rates on the side of the Ukrainians as well, but this city has been a really pivotal point to stopping the Russian advance. And as we move a little further east of the Bakhmut city area, we can see Bakhmut is down here, Chezavar is a little further down here, but we can see that this entire area here as a secondary line of defense has all these elevation hillsides. Very high elevations. The Russians are going to have a very difficult time, even if they are able to take all of this area here and the Bakhmut city. They're going to have a very difficult time advancing any further into Ukraine. So this is a very good strategy, I think, that the Ukrainians have used to delay the Russian advance, and really they can easily fall back into this other area and continue to defend Ukraine from further Russian attacks. If you like this video, please consider subscribing, hit the like button. I appreciate you all taking the time and being patient with the video and watching it all. I do want to thank all my subscribers for your support, and I will catch you on the next one. Thanks again.